England, the largest and most populous nation within the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, has long been recognised as a dominant force on the British Isles. Through its economic and military power, it has cast a long shadow over its neighbouring countries. However, it is a surprising truth that for much of its early history, England itself was deeply influenced by a wide variety of other cultures and languages. Since prehistoric times, this land has been a destination for countless waves of migration and conquest. Over thousands of years, these groups of people came and went, blending together to create a unique cultural identity, language and heritage. So, how did a relatively small nation manage to shape not only the fate of the British Isles, but also help build the modern world we live in today? This is the story of English history. A turbulent journey through wars of invasion and constant political ups and downs. The land that would one day become England looked very different to the first people who arrived during the Stone Age. Back then, the British Isles were not even islands at all, but were connected to mainland Europe by a massive stretch of land. About 11,000 years ago, as the last ice age came to an end, melting ice caused sea levels to rise. This submerged the low-lying plains known as Doggerland, permanently separating England from the rest of Europe. Despite this geographic separation, cultural exchange continued between the people on the continent and those living on the island. Around the year 4000 BCE, agricultural techniques that originated in the Middle East were introduced here. The first permanent settlements began to appear, marked by grand burial monuments and mysterious ritual stone circles, the most famous of which is Stonehenge. As the Stone Age gave way to the Bronze Age, England basically maintained similarities with the rest of the British Isles and Europe. Successive waves of migration from the continent brought new cultural customs and languages, gradually forming the Celtic culture that had spread across Western Europe by the 12th century BCE. Life for the people in England passed peacefully for many centuries. That was until the year 55 BCE, when an unprecedented invading force landed on the southern coast. This was the army of the Roman Republic, an ancient superpower on its way to expanding across the Mediterranean and pushing deeper north into what is now France. The Roman general leading the conquest of Gaul at that time was none other than Julius Caesar, and his ambitions soon turned toward the lands across the English Channel. Caesar's first invasion only managed to achieve a successful landing on the coast. Therefore, a larger-scale attack took place the following year, in 54 BCE. This time, the Roman legions advanced as far as the northern banks of the River Thames. Despite some success, the Romans were unable to establish a firm foothold on the island and were forced to withdraw. However, the intention to conquer this island always remained in the back of their minds. Nearly a century later, in the year 43 CE, the Roman Emperor Claudius ordered a well-planned and methodical invasion. In the following decades, Roman legions conquered almost the entire territory of what is now England, establishing many important settlements like London, Chester, and York. Although Roman power was sometimes challenged by native uprisings, such as the rebellion led by Queen Boudicca in the year 60, England remained an integral part of the Roman Empire for several centuries. The northern border of this land was secured by the construction of the massive Hadrian's Wall. However, like every empire in history, the rise and fall of Rome was inevitable. At the beginning of the 5th century, the power and influence of the empire had significantly declined. In the year 407, the last Roman legions were withdrawn from England to protect more valuable territories on the mainland that were being threatened by barbarian tribes. Not long after, some of these tribes turned their attention toward England, starting a chain of events that would shape the language, culture, and history of the English people forever. The Germanic tribes known in history as the Anglo-Saxons first migrated to England around the 4th century, possibly as mercenaries for the Roman army in its final stages. By the middle of the 5th century, a significant number of Anglo-Saxons had settled in the eastern part of the country. The nature of this process is still a subject of debate among historians. Some argue it was a large-scale invasion that violently replaced the native Celtic population, while others believe it was a slow and peaceful process of cultural blending. Either way, the Anglo-Saxons replaced the Roman Celtic language, culture, and people with their own Germanic customs and lifestyle. The language they brought with them would one day develop into the English we use today. Despite being unified in language, culture, and religion, the Anglo-Saxons were divided politically. They established their own independent kingdoms across the land. By the 7th century, the native Britons had retreated to the far western parts of the island, like Wales and Cornwall. This left 7 Anglo-Saxon petty kingdoms: East Anglia, Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, Northumbria, and Wessex, forming the foundation of a distinct but not yet unified English nation. Over time, the Anglo-Saxons gradually abandoned their old Germanic pagan beliefs to convert to Christianity. They began to consolidate power, frequently fighting each other, as well as the British kingdoms to the west and the Picts to the north. By the end of the 8th century, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had merged into 4 larger ones: Northumbria, Mercia, East Anglia, and Wessex. However, the survival of Anglo-Saxon England was about to be put in serious doubt when longships suddenly appeared offshore in the late 8th century. A new enemy, more brutal and aggressive than any force they had ever faced, had arrived. The Viking Age in England is said to have begun with the attack on the monastery of Lindisfarne in Northumbria in 793. This was a well-documented event in history. Although there had been other smaller raids in England and other parts of the Isles before this, the attack on Lindisfarne marked a turning point. It began with lightning raids on isolated, wealthy monasteries and continued throughout the next century. But by the year 865, the Vikings changed their strategy from raiding and retreating to conquest and permanent occupation. At the end of 865, a massive Viking army landed in southeastern England with the intent to take the lands of the 4 Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. This great heathen army, as the Anglo-Saxon chronicles called them, first marched north and took control of the kingdom of Northumbria in 867. Next was East Anglia in 869, and then Mercia in 874. Finally, only the Kingdom of Wessex remained as the last independent Anglo-Saxon kingdom led by King Alfred. Wessex had until then tried to fight off the Viking raiders either by battle or by paying ransoms. However, by 878, the Vikings had overrun much of Wessex, forcing King Alfred into hiding. With the threat to his kingdom and the future of England hanging by a thread, King Alfred gathered an army for a final battle against the Vikings at the Battle of Edington in May of that year. The decisive victory at Edington earned King Alfred the title the Great. He successfully pushed the Vikings back to the east into lands that remained under their rule, known as the Danelaw. With Anglo-Saxon dominance restored, the kings of Wessex gradually began to reconquer the rest of England from Viking occupation. Alfred's grandson, Athelstan, successfully conquered the Kingdom of York in 927 and, for the first time, declared himself King of the English. The rise of a unified and powerful English kingdom made neighbouring rulers on the British Isles feel uneasy. They quickly formed an alliance of Vikings and Scots to challenge Aethelstan's dominance in 934. The subsequent Battle of Brunanburh was one of the most decisive battles in the history of the British Isles. Athelstan's army won, securing the independence and supremacy of England for nearly a century. However, as the new millennium began, the English kings became complacent, and the threat from the Danish Vikings rose once again. In the following decades, the English throne constantly changed hands between Anglo-Saxon and Danish rulers. There was even a time when this kingdom was part of a vast North Sea empire under King Canute the Great. By 1042, the House of Wessex restored the throne under King Edward the Confessor. However, his lack of a male heir once again pushed the future of England into uncertainty, with numerous claimants to the succession. When Edward died in 1066, a powerful English noble named Harold Godwinson took the throne. This caused resentment for Duke William of Normandy in France, King Harald Hardrada of Norway, and King Sweyn II of Denmark. All of them claimed they had the right to inherit the throne. The events of 1066 were certainly the most pivotal in English history, and would permanently change the nature and fabric of the country. The Battle of Stamford Bridge took place in September of that year, where King Harold Godwinson defeated an invading force led by his Norwegian rival. But only a few weeks later, his exhausted army was forced to march quickly south to face another invading army led by Duke William of Normandy. The Battle of Hastings, which took place on October 14th, 1066, is perhaps the most famous date in English history. King Harold was killed in battle, traditionally said to be by an arrow to the eye. The final result was the end of the line of Anglo-Saxon kings, replaced by a new French Norman dynasty. William crowned himself King of England on Christmas Day of that year. A new era had begun, but it was built on blood and fire, and the mark of the new conqueror would reshape England in a profound and lasting way. Many empires once prospered and then vanished after only a few generations. The book Collapse by Jared Diamond analyses why that happens, from the environment and economy to human error. Placed alongside the journey of the United Kingdom, this book shows us that sustainability is never a given. A brief and easy-to-understand summary of this book is available on the Sac Tingon app, helping you understand the foundational issues of giant empires in just 20 minutes. In addition, we have summarised hundreds of other similar books. You can download the app at the website sactingon.com or search for it on the App Store and Google Play. Now, let's continue with the main content of our video. The Norman Conquest brought a profound change to the governing body of England. After crushing numerous English rebellions and asserting dominance over neighbouring kingdoms in Wales and Scotland, King William I ordered the compilation of the Domesday Book. This was a comprehensive survey of the land, the people, and the monetary value of his kingdom. This work revealed a harsh truth. Almost the entire Anglo-Saxon noble class had been replaced by Normans. Along with that, the French language was introduced and became the language of the ruling noble class. From this point on, the future of England was closely tied to France, because many English lords now also owned feudal lands across the Channel. The Norman dynasty only lasted about 80 years in England. Another succession crisis broke out, sparking an open civil war between the legitimate heir of Henry I, Empress Matilda, and the noble favourite, Stephen of Blois. The result was that Stephen ruled until his death in 1154, and his successor was Matilda's son, Henry II. As a descendant of both the Norman and Plantagenet noble lines, along with his marriage to Eleanor of Aquitaine, Henry II not only ruled England and parts of Wales and Ireland, but also governed a vast territory in western France. This territory was later known as the Angevin Empire. During the Middle Ages, England was ruled largely by the kings of the House of Plantagenet, but it went through many highs and lows. The period from the late 12th century to the mid-13th century was marked by disasters and political instability. Their territory on the continent was significantly reduced due to conflicts with the Kingdom of France. As a result, dissatisfaction among the powerful English nobility led to the limitation of the king's absolute power. This happened when King John signed the Magna Carta in 1215. Despite this, civil war between the king and the barons continued for much of the century, and only ended when King Edward I took the throne in 1272. Edward I consolidated the power of the government by opening the first Parliament and significantly expanded England's influence on the British Isles by conquering Wales and trying to do the same with Scotland. As the 14th century began, England continued to engage in wars of expansion with its neighbours, especially against France. This started a series of long and persistent conflicts, known collectively as the 100 Years' War. Under the reign of King Edward III, England achieved resounding successes at the battles of Crécy and Poitiers. However, military operations soon had to pause when a completely different and much more dangerous enemy was about to land on the shores of England. The Black Death, a terrifying pandemic that originated in Asia and spread across Europe in the second half of the 1340s, reached England on a ship from Gascony in 1348. Within less than 2 years, the plague had spread across the country and is estimated to have killed more than half the population. This disaster not only reduced the manpower for the English army, but also led to profound socio-economic changes within the country. The surviving peasant class faced increasing taxes to pay for costly wars. Meanwhile, the wages for their labour, which was in higher demand than ever, were not being fairly paid. These tensions finally exploded into the Peasants' Revolt in 1381. Riots spread across the country, but were most concentrated in the southeast, where rebels marched on London and killed many government officials whom they blamed for their misery. Order was eventually restored, but the situation in England remained very unstable. The unpopular King Richard II was deposed by his cousin in 1399, who then became King Henry IV. Crises and rebellions continued to trouble his reign, but they were successfully suppressed largely thanks to the military actions of his son and successor, Henry V, who took the throne in 1413. Under King Henry V, England witnessed some of the most fateful events in its history. This included the resumption of the 100 Years' War with France and the incredible victory at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, a battle that later became an English legend. However, the sudden death of Henry in 1422 started a reversal of England's fortunes. His young son, Henry VI, succeeded to the throne, but his reign was marked by successive defeats against France in the ongoing conflict. The climax was the English being driven out of almost all their territory by 1453. England's troubles did not stop there. A bloody internal conflict was about to engulf the kingdom for decades to come. King Henry VI's position became increasingly worse in the following years. Dissatisfaction among the nobility competing for power sparked another civil war in 1455, named the War of the Roses. The name comes from the symbols of the two rival branches of the Plantagenet dynasty, the white rose of the House of York and the red rose of the House of Lancaster. The war was fought intermittently over the next 30 years, leaving England in a period of chaos and bloodshed. It was not until Henry Tudor, the last surviving man of the Lancaster line, returned from exile in France and defeated the Yorkist king Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485. Only then did the war come to an end. England then entered a period of relative peace. The houses of Lancaster and York were united under the marriage of King Henry VII to Elizabeth of York. This opened a new dynasty, the Tudor dynasty. The war-torn economy was gradually rebuilt. Enlightened ideas emerging from the Renaissance in Italy also began to enter English society. When Henry VII died in 1509, his son Henry VIII succeeded him. His reign started promisingly, but later fell into tyranny, and became one of the most volatile periods in all of English history. The main cause stemmed from his desire to have a male heir. His first marriage to Catherine of Aragon only produced one surviving daughter, Mary. After being denied a divorce by the Pope, Henry VIII decided to separate England from the Catholic Church and establish his own Church of England, a Protestant church. This decision caused a major religious upheaval in the country, and later gave rise to a period of sectarianism lasting nearly 100 years. Henry's subsequent marriages, and hopes for a line of male successors, were not much better. His second wife, Anne Boleyn, was executed after giving birth to only one daughter named Elizabeth. His third wife, Jane Seymour, died of complications after giving birth to a son named Edward. The fourth marriage, to Anne of Cleves, ended in divorce. The fifth wife, Catherine Howard, was executed for infidelity, and the sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, was the only one to survive with her reputation and her head intact, thanks to Henry himself passing away in 1547. His only son, Edward VI, succeeded him. Under his rule, England became extremely Protestant. However, this reign was short-lived because Edward died of tuberculosis in 1553. His successor was his half-sister Mary, who was married to King Philip II of Spain, and was a devout Catholic. Queen Mary's reign saw the fall of England's last outpost on the continent, Calais, to the French in 1558. But her reign was mainly defined by efforts to reverse the recent Protestant Reformation in England by brutally suppressing any followers of this faith. About 280 people were burned at the stake under her harsh rule, earning her the nickname Bloody Mary. Despite being married, she was also unable to produce an heir. Therefore, when she died in 1558, the English throne was passed to her half-sister Elizabeth. Under Queen Elizabeth I, England entered a golden age of prosperity. The Protestant Church of England was re-established, and a certain degree of religious tolerance was granted to Catholics. State institutions were strongly reinforced through new laws and an efficient administrative machine, leading to a significant increase in the national population, reaching about 5 million people by the early 17th century. Elizabethan England also witnessed a great development of arts and literature, with names like William Shakespeare creating some of the nation's most famous works and plays that are still popular today. Also during this time, England's economic and military power took a significant leap forward, largely due to the expansion of English commercial interests in the Americas and Asia. Figures like Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake pioneered making England a powerful maritime nation. They led expeditions to newly discovered lands and successfully defended England in its hour of greatest peril against the Spanish Armada in 1588. However, Elizabeth I died childless in 1603. Consequently, the throne was passed to her closest Protestant male relative, King James VI of Scotland, of the House of Stuart. He then became King James I of England through the union of the crowns. A new dynasty had begun, but the merging of two kingdoms under one king also brought new challenges. The seeds of a conflict even larger than the War of the Roses were beginning to sprout. Despite being king of both countries and ruling almost the entire island of Great Britain, the two kingdoms of England and Scotland remained separate. James I's reign faced many challenges, most notably the Gunpowder Plot of 1605, when a group of disgruntled English Catholics plotted to blow up the king during the opening of Parliament. Also during this time, the first permanent English colonies were established in places like America and India, laying the foundation for the British Empire for centuries to come. The later part of King James's reign was marked by increasing tensions with Parliament over the management of the country. However, these issues reached a dramatic climax under the reign of his son, Charles I. Disagreements over power, religious issues, and governance within the kingdom, along with King Charles I's refusal to cooperate with Parliament, led to growing dissatisfaction between the two power centres in England. Finally, in 1642, armed conflict broke out. The English Civil War took place between forces loyal to the king, known as Royalists, and the forces of Parliament, known as Roundheads. Major battles like Edge Hill, Marston Moor and Naseby played a pivotal role in deciding the outcome of the war. It finally ended with the victory of Parliament's new model army under the leadership of Oliver Cromwell. For his role in leading the country into a state of chaotic civil war, King Charles I was executed in 1649. England briefly became a republic with Cromwell as its leader. The monarchy was eventually restored in 1660, with the return of King Charles II to London, although his power was significantly reduced. The country remained in a fragile state after the Civil War. Two major events happened in London in the mid-1660s. The Great Plague of 1665 and the Great Fire of 1666 caused heavy damage to the nation's capital. The reign of the Stuarts ended with the death of Charles II in 1685, and his successor was his brother James II. However, this quickly caused another political storm in the kingdom because James was a devout Catholic, and there were rumours that he wanted England to return to the old faith. Various political factions quickly pushed for his Protestant daughter, Mary, and her Dutch husband, Prince William of Orange, to replace him. This event is known as the Glorious Revolution. William landed with an invading force on the southern coast of England in November 1688, but he did not want to seek an open battle. He believed that James II's regime would collapse on its own. This is exactly what happened, and James fled to France to hide, allowing William and Mary to take on the roles of king and queen as co-rulers. Although James seemed to have abdicated, he still had some support in Ireland and therefore decided to launch a military campaign there in hopes of restoring his throne. However, James was defeated by King William's forces in battle, and once again forced to flee to France. The existence of the Catholic Stuart line in exile would thus continue to threaten British politics throughout the next century. England returned to a period of relative peace. Under the rule of William and Mary, both accepted the Bill of Rights of 1689. This document significantly reduced the power of the Crown by recognising the authority and sovereignty of Parliament. Under the reign of Queen Anne, who inherited the throne from her sister Mary, the Parliaments of England and Scotland officially merged into one. This created the Parliament and the Kingdom of Great Britain through the Acts of Union in 1707. Queen Anne was the last of the Stuart dynasty. Because of a new law that only allowed Protestants to become regents, when she died, the crown was given to her distant second cousin, the German Prince George of Hanover. From that point on, the history of England would no longer be the history of a separate sovereign nation, but the history of one of the four nations that make up the United Kingdom. England, and the entire United Kingdom, under the Hanoverian kings of the 18th century, transformed into a modern, commercial nation with a developing mercantilism. This turned the country into the world's leading maritime power, backed by the military strength of the Royal Navy on the oceans. British colonies also became increasingly important during this time. However, the loss of America in the War of Independence significantly damaged the country's prestige on the world stage. The only real internal threat to the nation was from the descendants of the exiled House of Stuart living in France. They tried to overthrow the British government and the Georgian monarchy on two separate occasions, but were unsuccessful in the Jacobite risings of 1715 and 1745. The 19th century saw the United Kingdom become the preeminent global superpower of the age. This was thanks to the innovations introduced by the Industrial Revolution. These innovations boosted the nation's economic output and allowed for the further expansion of the British Empire. The empire would become the largest empire to ever exist in world history. However, the fateful events of the 20th century followed, specifically World War I and World War II. These nearly exhausted a nation and signalled the beginning of the end of British dominance as a world power. The history of the past 2,000 years has certainly left its mark on the modern English nation. Its people are descendants of many different groups who have come to its shores over the centuries. Although the impact of these events may no longer be obvious to the modern eye, their legacy is perhaps most noticeable in the modern English language we speak today. Whether they are loanwords from Latin introduced by the Romans, the Germanic tongue of the Anglo-Saxons, the Old Norse of the Vikings, or the French of the Normans. The language of England is the result of the constant evolution and adaptability of its speakers. That is perhaps why it has become the most widely spoken language in the world today. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to leave a comment and watch other videos on the channel to support the team. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next videos.